Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here for this late night, or at least for me, it's late night session. I'm so grateful to be able to moderate and introduce the next speaker, who has been an inspiration to me in my ethnobotanical journey. And I'll just say a little bit about myself. My name is Joseph Mays. I am an ethnobotanist and anthropologist, and I'm on Chacruna's Ayahuasca Community Committee, and I've been a part of Chacruna's Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative of the Americas, which I encourage everyone to check out at the booth in the conference, as well as on our website. The page just launched today, and it's a great resource for connecting with Indigenous organizations and trying to find ways to provide support. And this next talk is going to be about the short film Almost Visible and Kathleen Harrison's work of 26 years of friendship with the Mazatec family in southern Mexico, and the ancient plant and mushroom knowledge that they hold. So just give you a quick summary of Kathleen's work. She's an ethnobotanist who teaches internationally about global and regional beliefs and practices involving plants and fungi. She specializes in the study of ritual and mythical relationships with nature. Her 4 decades of recurrent fieldwork include research in Mexico, Peru, Ecuador, Costa Rica, and Hawaii. And she contributed a chapter to the book Cannabis and Spirituality, an Explorer's Guide to an Ancient Plant Spirit Ally. In her investigations with Indigenous people and her personal experience, she often focuses on the persona or perceived active essence of a ceremonial plant or mushroom species. Kat co-founded Botanical Dimensions in 1985 with Terrence McKenna, a nonprofit that has sponsored ethnobotanical research and documentation projects in various countries. Where it is based in San Francisco, it also hosts the unique Botanical Dimensions Ethnobotany Library and offers classes taught by Kat and others. So I'm really happy to bring Kat on and hear from her. And thank you all for being here. And I just want to remind everyone to stay engaged in the chat and post your questions in the Q&A, because at the end we'll have time for some questions, about 20-25 minutes, and we want to make sure that we get to as many as we can, and you can vote on the questions that you want to be answered, and we'll be able to hear from Kat. So I'm going to bring Kat on now and turn it over to her. Thank you.
There we go.
Hi. Hello.
Hi. Thank you for the introduction.
Sure.
Hello, everybody. Very nice to see you, sort of. I can't see you, but nice to be part of this amazing group today. And thank you to Bia and your vast crew of brilliant people for gathering us all and for coordinating this in what I find to be a challenging medium, but here we are. So it's true that I've been doing this for actually, excuse me, closer to 50 years now. What I came to see as ethnobotanical fieldwork, I started it before I had the terminology for it, and that I've been in the psychedelic world for over 50 years as well. And so I'm well seasoned, and and I love to teach. I love to teach in person. I haven't completely adapted to this medium, but I have many directions that my thematic interests take me in. But what I want to just talk about in this short interval today is the film, but it's really to show you the film and talk about the people that the film is about, the people and their world and our relationship, our friendship. And that's just piece, I guess. It's just a relatively, in the big spectrum of all I've done, it's a relatively small portion of it, time-wise, but in terms of what it means to me in my life and how it infuses me, how it fills my heart, and how often I think of them all, and I think they of me. It's really, it's extended family, and you'll see in this little film. So I just want to give you some background there. Some of it's in the film. Beginning in the mid-90s, I started visiting. I had visited Mexico many times in my life. I grew up as kind of outsider on an island, thinking that islanders thought the same way, but nobody else did, which I still sort of feel. And then as I traveled, I tended to want to meet the people who had been on the land the longest and to just hang out with them and see how they faced daily life and help if I could, just whatever their tasks were, and help with the children. And I traveled all through my 20s doing that. And sometimes it was in search of a psychedelic experience and or an altered state or a ritual of some sort, but it was many things. Oh, I just lost. Am I still there? Maybe you can see me. I can't see you. Okay, there we go. I hope that's still working. And so when my life got into kind of a very low place, I went to the Mazatecs for help with healing my broken world and my broken worldview, really, because I had become a student of worldview by that point. Through the plants and the fungi and people's relationship to them, how can I understand how they explain reality to themselves? How can I be blessed with a glimpse of another way of being in the world and of understanding how this rich complexity works and what makes things happen? How do we respond to them, and why do we respond that way? What do we believe about how it all operates? That comes through our language, our practice, our treatment of each other. And that's a cultural difference. It's a family difference sometimes. It's an individual difference sometimes. But the worldview really is very much cultural and very much embedded in a language that has risen out of a place with that intimate relationship, grounded in that place. And so I went there, and you'll see in the film, I developed surprising connections and friendships that expanded and branched and rooted in ways that I never could have anticipated, and just really deeply moved me and gave me great insight. But also those connections that happened in that first visit in 1995, where I stayed for 6 weeks, they were so deep that I went back the next year and stayed longer. And we developed a relationship with this old healer, Don Rutilio Andrade, where he was teaching me. But really, it was that we were all hanging out together, living life. And they included me so generously after a number of tests. And they understood that I was a student of something that you can't really label, and that I was an emissary of some kind, because they understood that I was both a student and a teacher. So I want you to understand as you see this, that at least from Don Rutilio's point of view, there is some kind of conscious exchange going on. I was not an apprentice, never asked and never was appointed that. And I'm not a curandera. I'm not a shaman. I don't hold circles for people to experience these things. But I do gather insights, and I look for patterns and I find them. And then I write about those, I teach about those, I carry them with me. I'm writing a book now about this, and yet I have lots of series of photographs and field notes and recordings and memories and anecdotes that a few years ago, well, I'm going to say this, I took different family members. I took my daughter, I took another time my very young niece, I'd taken two of my best girlfriends, each one at a time. Each of these people has had insights, and they have documented, a couple of them with video. I've gone most of my trips, I've gone on my own. So we're talking about perhaps 12, 14 trips. But sometimes with people who then, by showing it to them and explaining to them and having them have their own insights and reflecting those back to me, then I was able to enhance my understanding and my expression of it. And my dear friend Ruthie Ristich, who helped with some of the video, and my daughter Klea McKenna, who's the director and did a lot of the video, they both said, we need to put this into the format of film, because there's so much that, despite teaching and writing, we can communicate differently in a film. And really, the subject of the film, it's not your study of Mazatec people, which I knew. It's not a study of their plants, although I have studied their plants. It is really about a cross-cultural relationship and how that built and what that looks like at this point in history in two cultures that are undergoing great change and influencing each other, but on the very specific level of two families. And so that's what the film became. And Klea is the director, and Dana Lehman is the editor. And it's all women working on it. It's mostly women in it. And there's some sort of principles I'd like to tell you about, but I can't really tell how much time we have here. So I think I'll show you the film and then talk more about it afterwards. Let's see if there's anything else here I want to tell you before I show it. I want to talk about reciprocity, but I can do that afterwards. And I want to thank Brett Blosser. That's what it is. He's an anthropologist and a very old friend of mine, and who met this family before I did, because he was just out in the Sierra Mazatec, wild, narrow little paths, cave hunting, and met these brothers, and they took him home, and he was there quite a while before he realized how much the elders knew and what they were up to, really. You know, they were so subtle. They're not people who deal with outsiders. And then a few years after he met them is when he had told me about them and written me letters. And then I got into kind of a desperate moment in my life. And I said, would you tell me how to find them? I know they're way out there. And would you give me an introduction, something I can say that will make them consider opening the door? And so we did that. And I really appreciate Brett. It's an ongoing conversation with him. So this, I do want to also say, this little film, it's 12 minutes. It's what we call a teaser. It's a short documentary, but it's a teaser because Klea and all of us can picture it with all the material we have being a 45-minute to an hour film. And so we're working on that. And this is the beginning of it. Okay, let's see. Karen, you can start the film.
Thank you, Kat. Very much looking forward to sharing this. So let me just get this on really quick.
When I was around 18 or 19 and people would ask me what I wanted to do, I would sometimes say, I want to be amazed. person that I knew myself to be was a traveler. And that was travel to go find something, learn something, and then share something. But I wasn't sure how that would manifest. Early 1995, I knew that I had been living very tenuously, the family falling apart, parents and I splitting up, and the question of who am I? I had been so involved in his career. And then I had this heart issue, which had begun in the week that Terrence and I split up. It was a dark time. The kids were away for 2 weeks, so I pulled together a little money and came to the state of Oaxaca, sola. I ate Salvia divinorum leaves while in the presence of a great feminine being. I talked with La Pastora, asking for guidance. Show them the edge of the garden. Móstrelos la orilla del jardín.
Not the obvious thing to do in that situation. During this period, the early years of you going there, I was a young teenager here. But I think that in my memory of all of this, there's you, the like broke single mom in California with teenage kids going off the rails. And then there's you, the like exotic explorer doing your work in Mexico. But I had kind of separated the two stories.
I mean, I was hungry for the experience, but I was really seeking a perspective on my life situation from another worldview. And whether that came through a psychedelic experience or an awakening that I had by going to the edge, go to the edge and something will happen, that would be the cure.
Yo que sepa, mi abuelo es curandero. Para mí es algo muy bonito, porque no todo es medicamentos, inyecciones, no todo es eso, sino mi abuelito se basa en plantas medicinales.
I first met Don Rutilio Andrade in 1995, summertime, mushroom season. He says that he got involved in all of this, in learning to be a healer when he was a young boy, when he was 11 years old. And he said many people were getting sick and people were dying.
Ajá, el honguito, bueno, le dicen honguito alucinante. Es para, pero siempre debe de estar un curandero para darle una ceremonia. Es para, te ayuda a cómo seguir el camino, porque si no te puedes quedar a medio y no regresas igual. Y ahora sí.
Early in the 70s, there was this period of about 6 or 7 years that they now still refer to as the hippie invasion. And it did change Huautla greatly. A lot of Mazatec people just became very closed and private people. And then I came in 20 years after that.
Your method of research essentially is working through relationship, but you also seem somewhat surprised that you were kind of swept up into relationships.
Yes, the relationships became more powerful than the research.
¿Cuánto tiempo ha conocido a Cata?
Uy, muchos años.
Sí.
Muchos años. Me conoció como de 8 años. Ahora tengo 30 años. Pues sí, es algo raro, como dice ella, porque no hay amistades así tan largas.
Sí.
Tan largas. Y ha visto a la familia crecer también. Y pues es bonito de que también yo sepa un poco de su familia y ella de nuestra familia.
Catalina, she returns again and then again. They trusted always that I would come again. Cycle is so important. Things of value don't just happen once.
It's Fiona.
This was a break from traditional academic kind of boundaries of anthropology and how to work that had been laid out, you know, in the early 20th century by men. And
Oh, yes. In the mid-90s, Ruth Behar and others developed a method of subjective witnessing. I mean, you can't go in as an observer. That old fallacy of actually see a scene without changing it, that doesn't happen. And do you embrace that as part of a dynamic, as long as they're embracing it? With your hearts connected, if you're lucky enough to develop a relationship, a context like that, what do you learn there? Internationally, there were things shifting that were going to change life in Mexico for poor people. And one of those was NAFTA. China came in and opened up factories. I just saw many women, single moms with their families, looking at, can we make it here? Josefina was among those, and in desperation, she took her 4 kids and she moved to Tehuacan, and she got a job in a maquiladora, which is a clothing factory. Very dubious practices, very low pay to the people, and that meant really scratching out a living on the street. And then the rules changed and China pulled out. Their jobs were lost then. So we've watched that transition happen, and we followed the fates of those who moved down to the lowlands.
I feel like we've watched them go from subsistence farmers to basically urban poor.
Pues se va a desaparecer, o sea, ya no va a haber el mazateco, se van a perder las tradiciones, los eventos, todo se va a perder. Yo soy la última de la familia y es bonito, la verdad es muy bonito. Y yo ahora sí hubiera sí querido estar más tiempo allá para poder haber aprendido más y estar más allá que acá. La verdad, sinceramente, me gusta más allá que acá. Me gusta mucho más allá que acá. Y pues ahora sí quisiera lo mismo para mi hija, el bienestar de ella y ahora sí que no perdiera nada de las costumbres que tenemos nosotros. Sí, la verdad igual lo mismo.
Somos pasajeros este mundo, llegamos viejo o joven, pero pues que pues tenemos que aceptar las cosas.
I first started bringing my daughter, Klea, when she was about age 21. I wanted her to understand me better. I wanted to see that world through her eyes, as well as show that world to her. I had fallen in love with people there, and I wanted to show the people I loved to each other. Just wanted to connect them.
To me, the other big ethical question in this work is who benefits? What is our effect on them? Because we haven't stood back and observed. We've intervened a lot.
Yes. I like to follow the spiritual and cultural mandate of reciprocity, you know, that nothing should be given just one way. And that has to be the ethic that I go by as a subjectively heart-engaged, anthropologically oriented ethnobotanist. We owe the medicine itself and the people who held it. We owe them the respect of acknowledging them and of learning from them, it's just like a language. There's a stream of knowledge embedded in rituals and practices that has taken hundreds or thousands of years to develop, techniques that shape it so that it isn't just like colorful chaos. That partly comes out of the skill of navigating by people who understand it well and whose ancestors have even understood it. Don Rutilio says to this day, you know, it felt like destiny. It was laid out as a potential network of connections, and all we had to do was say yes. She reached out and ran her hands through us like a breeze, like a ripple, and I knew in those moments that my body was clear, in perfect order. Signor Rutilio, Cipriano, Signora Luisa, and the 7-year-old granddaughter Rosalba, all paying her attention. I realized we were all plants at the edge of her garden.
There we go.
Okay, thank you, Kat. And if you can actually unmute yourself, because I did mute you for that video.
I think I'm unmuted.
That'd be great.
Can you hear me?
Thanks.
Yes.
Oh, try that again. Let's see. Oh, here we go. All right, we have you back. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I have another 10 minutes or something to talk, and then Q&A, I think. Well, I hope you enjoyed that and found it interesting. I wish it had been a little clearer quality audio and visual, but that's, I think, because of the double internet showing. Let's see, what do I want to say? I'd like to say more about the reciprocity piece and as Klea mentioned in the film, that we have intervened, that we have gotten involved in their lives, and they've gotten involved in our lives too. And one of the ways is that I'm always supportive of education, and for people without means in Mexico, and very much for indigenous people, going to school isn't a given. You have to have shoes, you have to paper, you have to buy your books, you have to be able to get there. And then often, especially the girls, when they get to be 13 or so, they're taken out of school to help work and make a little more money to help raise the younger kids, you know. And so with Rosalba, who you saw in there at different ages, and she's been my goddaughter longest, and she has 3 children now. I met her when she was 7. She was, her mother took her out of school at age 13. And in those days, I mean, they've never gotten mail. I've never been able to get mail to anybody there. Either it got stolen from the mail en route, or they actually just had never received mail, the more rural people, you know, because it's a network of about a dozen households. And now those are not all in the Sierra Mazateca, because about half the family has moved down to the southern Puebla, to the outskirts of this city, Tehuacan. And so we communicated in the early days by a promise that I would return in roughly this amount of time, 18 months or whatever it was. And then they would be hoping, and I would be here thinking, oh, I hope I have the resources to do that, to get back there, and that everything is steady. And sometimes I did, and sometimes I didn't. They do communicate by dreams, and twice I arrived to find that young girls, and 2 different girls, different times, had dreamt that I was coming and told everyone that I was coming, that I would be there in 3 days or 7 days. And then I showed up twice. That worked. And then eventually Rosalva started using the one internet cafe, and we emailed once a month. And then that went to once a week. And no one to this day has their own computer, but some of them have phones now. And then in recent years, the last 3 years or so, we communicate by WhatsApp, and we talk every few days. And I am very well informed on everything going on with this multi-household extended family over, a couple of 100 miles. And so all of that, I mean, this is 21st century. I sometimes say, is this ethnobotany? Because like, where are the plants? Well, they're in there, but this connection, this flow, and this way that I love them and also just learn from them and the way they deal with adversity and make their choices. And they count on me, partly, mostly, it's mutual, to just be thinking of them, to be praying for them. And we ask each other to do that. And they're very great visualizers. Don Rutilio has a fantastic capacity. He was known when he was a young man. He started training when he was 11, but when he was in his 20s, he and his partner, Maria Luisa, told me once that when he became known over a wide area was when he found someone who had been missing for 10 years. And he found them by, the wife had dreams that her missing husband was still alive, but no one knew where he was. And he, Don Rutilio, took mushrooms and went into a state of looking for him. And he saw him, and he had to take mushrooms several times over a couple of months and locate him. And then finally he hiked this long, long hike into the mountains and found him where he had been living in a cave for 10 years. He had fallen in his head or something, forgotten his life, and somebody had to find him. He was just a survivor without connections. And that gave Don Rutilio credibility as a healer and a finder. But to this day, now he's 91, he's known for being able to, for having distance vision and being able to go into a state where he can see how people are who have gone to the other side, which is the United States, el otro lado, or who have disappeared or they've not heard news for a long time. And he does the same with me. And I feel that I really have learned to do some of that with him too. So there's just so much to say, and it's a very short time, but I just want to say this reciprocity has taken the form of getting 3 of those sisters through school, got Rosalva back into school. I said, how much can she earn a month to help support the family? And they told me, which wasn't that much. And so I paid that. And then her younger sisters, they all got high school degrees. 2 of them got a year of a small local university. And then there's others just getting what other kids in the extended family need so that they can go to school and they can do what they need. Right now we have like an oxygen fund because these folks, they're not going to the hospital for COVID. It's just a place where people die, they say, but people do try to get a tank of oxygen to get their sick ones through. And then I'm helping them in a long-term way with some security and being sure they all are housed and that kind of thing. But that's just part of my personal and my family reciprocity. Part of it is on a larger level that in a society that's changing as much as theirs is, and it's changed greatly since the mid-90s when I first went there. And it had already changed greatly from the 70s and then from the 50s when Wasson first went there. And of course, all the way, if you look all the way back, I mean, these people moved into those mountains as part of some migration a long time ago. We don't know if it was I think there are theories, but I haven't read a definitive theory of, was it the, disintegration of the Olmec Empire way, way back? Was it later, the classic great civilizations with the monumental architecture that that rose up to their classic and post-classic periods, and then kind of came apart, and the people moved back into agricultural lifestyles. And we see these remnants of these fantastic cultures, and they exist in the language and in the mythology, and to some extent in the ruins and in the art forms, certainly, and in the seeds. You know, I mean, they're fantastic agriculturalists, and maize was developed right there, the very first maize in the Tehuacan Valley. So they're the Mazatec people I see. They don't build, you know, temples and castles and things. They know the land, they know the plants, they know the mushrooms, and they know the invisible world. And that's what they are masters of, really. And yet these invasions have happened in different ways at different times, including the Aztecs coming in the 15th century, and the Spanish then coming in the 16th century, and oppressing that's when, well, we don't know how on the surface the use of the mushroom and the salvia divinorum and all of that was when the Spanish came in. Before that, but we do know that the Spanish pushed it down. You cannot do that. They forbade it. They persecuted people. They prosecuted people. Perhaps they put people to death. We don't know. And the Mazatec people took that knowledge, and they sank it beneath the surface, and they kept practicing it. And they gave all the parts different names, and they kept practicing it, and they kept it alive that 500 years under, you know, Catholicism and the overlays of European culture that came in on top of them. And then there was another discovery, so to speak, and invasion, and that was the mid 20th century, late 20th century invasion by so-called Westerners, with our fascination with altered states, with shamanism, a new concept to us, to you know, the 20th century Western world, and our hunger for individual experience and thrills and spirituality, and, you know, all the different things that are appealing about it, but that also were experienced as an invasion and as exploitation, and can be interpreted as cultural appropriation, biological appropriation, all of those things that are unanswered questions, and a lot of people aren't even dealing with them, but they do run through this medicine. These questions do attend the mushroom, and they do attend ayahuasca and all these others as well. What is the history? Who held it? How long did they hold it? Against what odds? How did it change through time? And what does this chapter mean? You know, this chapter that we're in right now, and this explosion of psilocybin into the world. I think I'll sorry, I can't tell how many more minutes I have. I think I'll finish, and then we'll do Q&A with this comment that I have wondered, perhaps if you've experienced psilocybin, you've had a sense of when the visions are coming to an end, when kind of like that magical world begins to fade and flutter, and this one starts to kind of come through it again, and you know you're beginning to reach the end of that journey. I remember reading years ago one of the things that Maria Sabina said. I think it was in the Alvaro Estrada book. She said, you know, when the mushroom is leaving, when the state is wearing off, because los duendes come, the little magical earthen people who are busy in the background, in the world, they come and they start taking the vision apart, stone by stone, brick by brick, as though it's a screen here, and they're picking the pieces out of it, and it begins to pixelate, and then it just crumbles to the ground, and then you're back, and you have what you remember and what you integrate. And sometimes I wonder if that that pixelation and those duendes, that's a kind of entity that exists all over the world in earth-based people. They all have some version of the duendes, the little subtle earth movers who both build and take down things. And I sometimes wonder if that is a metaphor for what's happening now in their culture, what's happening this last century, that kind of this vision of being the knowledge holders and having this secret and private knowledge, which they so bravely and beautifully held for so long under great duress, that vision now pixelating? And are those bricks and pieces that are chips of it that are falling off migrating outwards? And is this transition where psilocybin is coming into the hands of the world and we're all each trying to figure out, for better or for worse, what to do with it and how to relate to it? Are we in the transition of one kind of possible reality into another one? And that's a very heavy thing if that's true. And what can we bring then? That's what I kept asking, is what can I learn from the people who were the knowledge holders, who knew how to mend the world day to day, year to year, century to century? What can I learn from them about mending, about carrying knowledge, about using it in a good way for this big picture, which is in dire straits? And it's not so much, although we each individually need to be strong enough to be functional and healed enough to carry on, but it isn't a personal thing. It really is like a cultural, and it's about stewarding nature and ourselves in nature and into the future. And I just try to look at this whole thing, including them migrating out and losing their land and losing their language, and us coming in and thinking that we're doing it sensitively, but it's somehow all changing anyway. And this story, how it's repeated in every culture that has a powerful plant or mushroom agent that we, the outsiders, are interested in, how much we change the picture, you know. So I'll just give you that food for thought, and then we'll go to Q&A. And I just want to say thank you to everybody. And also that we taught those three sisters, how to operate the camera and the recording machine. And they've gone and interviewed their grandfather, and they've made part of this film, which will show up in a future version of it. We just got pledged just this past week enough money to carry forward with the project for a while. So we are going to expand it. Thank you, everybody, for your attention. Thank you for this really interesting conference, and I'll take some questions.
Thank you so much, Kat. And I know we only have a few minutes for questions, but I appreciate you working through this challenging medium. I agree, it is not it's not the best, but we have some questions I think I want to make sure get answered, which are about how this one's from Krista, asking about how we can do, or is there something we can do to help in general, and how can we be more aware and more helpful? And specifically, we also have a question about donating to the Oxygen Fund, or you know, helping with some of those reciprocity efforts that you've been talking about, that you've mentioned. I think you're still muted. Sorry. I don't know who.
Okay. It's Botanical Dimensions is in charge of whatever money comes to our Mazatec Fund, and we have a fiscal sponsor, Inquiring Systems, Inc. And there are links on our website and on their website for Botanical Dimensions, and there's a way to designate that it's for the Mazatec Fund. And then within that fund, we use it for, well, now we've got a separate fund just for the film, but because we're excited to get funding for that. But for the other costs, if you donated to Botanical Dimensions, to the Mazatec Fund, we would make careful judicious decisions as the needs arise. Basically, it's mostly just come out of our families' pockets, but some people have been, a few people have been steady donors to the Mazatec Fund over the years, and we really appreciate that. And they are amazed to think that there are people that they've never met who care enough to, you know, pay a hospital bill when they need it, or buy some more bricks to add a new little room on the house because a new baby has been born, and whatever the needs are, you know. And so I appreciate that.
Great. So that's botanicaldimensions.org, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We're just about like next week to have a new website, but it's not up yet. So it'll be easier in a week.
Great. Okay, so we have another question here from Natalia about do you think that Mazatec people deserve some sort of recognition in the shape of economic support, given the amount of money corporations and other pharma are making from psilocybin? And what would that look like, maybe?
Oh, it's so tricky. I do certainly think that anyone who's making money off this knowledge and this medium, and, you know, we wouldn't have these psilocybe mushrooms to be talking about if they hadn't been both guardians of them and students of them for so long. It is just so tricky to disperse money into a culture. And I feel I can do it with their family is because we all know each other really well, and we talk to each other like aunts and uncles and cousins and daughters. And but I think it takes some careful communication and a few Mazatec voices of different kinds to, along with a few very sensitive non-Mazatec voices, to imagine what might be helpful. I have suggested before to someone who was interested in helping that I worry for the language. I mean, we know there are languages just dying out all the time, and there are still quite a few Mazatec speakers. There are many dialects, so they can't, one region doesn't talk to each other in Mazatec readily. But I just see, even among all the people I know, they're often marrying out of Mazatec. They're marrying another Huastec or another indigenous person of another region, and all the kids speak Spanish, and they don't get either of their parent languages, you know? And every time that multiplies, the language is farther from surviving. And they still teach it in the schools, but to my knowledge, not as much as Spanish. I think it's just, it's gradual, but not so gradual, because I've seen really a lot be lost in a quarter century. So maybe like a language cultural program that involved both parents, both adults and children, and I don't know, something like that. I am not probably going to start a new program myself at this point, but there are some people who are who might be suited to do that, and it shouldn't be outsiders. I mean, we can consult, but it should be people who really see the spectrum of what's needed there and are working and are empowered by a gift to do what's needed there. And yes, I do think that pharmaceutical companies and all the big entities that have so much money to put into the future of psilocybin, whatever aspect of it, should be much more aware of this place of origin and this knowledge of origin and these keepers, and reciprocate in whatever way is possible. It might be something like, you know, a really good water system in each village, or something that's very pragmatic, but that actually is really important to quality of life.
Yeah, those questions don't always have an easy answer about the best way to give back or provide support. But I thank you for your thoughts on that, because I think that's a good place to start. So asking those questions is the most important first step that you have to take in the first place. So and unfortunately, I think we're out of time. So if there's any last thing that you want to say, and also if you already said your website, botanicaldimensions.org, but if there's any other way that people can stay connected with you or your work, please mention that. And I just want to thank you again. I even had some questions I wanted to ask as well, but maybe through another medium.
Well, through another medium, maybe. And I will hang out, if I can figure out how, in your community room for a little bit. And the film is, now that it's just gotten a new infusion of energy and that we're going to go forward with it, is onfilm.com. And you can follow Botanical Dimensions and me on Instagram, and don't do Facebook much, but yeah, Instagram. And I have the Ethnobotany Library, I guess I should say this right now, in Occidental here in Sonoma County, north of San Francisco. It's also an education center, and we taught classes there for 5 years, and the library itself is wonderful. But it's been closed, and we don't know if it's going to reopen. So if there's someone who has a brilliant idea or the funds for that, it's not fully decided yet, but otherwise it might be pixelating also. There are people waiting to find out what's going to happen about that. So that's all I know right now. But thank you very much. I'm really glad to see Chacuna and big efforts of all sorts that are diverse, that are bringing in the lesser voices, that are bringing in international voices, for heaven's sake, to us and ours to them. It's a really good thing, and I really appreciate it and admire you all. So thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Kat. Yeah. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.